guys, welcome to another episode of our HONO series. Today, episode 6, we'll be looking at adding authentication to our application. And the lesson objective today would be we're going to understand the importance of user authentication. We're going to implement or have a look at JWT, which stands for JSON Web Tokens, in our application, at least in the first part. And then the second part of the lesson or the second upload, we'll be looking at protecting our routes and ensuring that only authenticated users have access to them. We're also going to be introducing much later down the line roles-based access control for user permissions. So who has permissions to access what resources. So how the lesson breakdown will go is we're going to be answering a few questions. The first one would be why authentication matters in your API. And when we're thinking about that, we're going to look at a few points. The first one being ensuring only authorized users can access your application, protecting sensitive data, preventing like any vulnerabilities and unauthorized access, that sort of thing. An example can be we can discuss the risks of an open API. So what is the danger of anyone being able to log into your Facebook, for example. We don't want those sort of effects. Another question would be we would be introducing JWT, which is JSON Web Tokens, what it is, how it's used to ensure sort of secure authentication in an API, and the structure of JWT. That's some of the specifics of JSON Web Tokens, the benefits of it, and then I've got a brief example of like the system on a high level and like a diagram here for us to sort of walk through how we'll sort of like can imagine this is going to work. So you can think of it as like three parts. We have a client, which is like our front end. We have a server, which is our back end that handles our business logic and core processes. And then we have the database, which usually stores all our data, right? And so right now, we're just going to be looking at two main aspects of our application flow. The first one would be registration, and that's basically the process of signing up, adding your account, being onboarded onto a platform or an API. Normally, as you may know, you have to put in like an email address and a password. Once that happens, we have like enough information for us to register you. So in this case, for the registration part, once the email and password gets added, we're going to do this thing that's called like hashing. And hashing basically just sort of encrypts your password, and this happens on the server. So on the front end, you make a request, you want to register your profile. We get to the server, we have the password and the email at this point, then we hash the password. Then what happens here is basically the password gets changed from like whatever you gave it to like an encrypted set of characters, basically, so that it's sort of hard to decrypt at this level. And then right after we hash the password, we then save the user, and that gets added to the database. So this is an example of normally what happens in an API that sort of is doing this sort of thing. So we register the accounts, we hash the password, and then we save the user. This is more of like a security sort of like feature, more or less, because you don't want to be saving users' passwords in your database, that sort of thing. Once the user gets saved into the database, we then have like a successful response, goes back to the client. Normally that would be congratulations, you've successfully signed up to Facebook or something like that. And then so that was the registration one. And then for the login flow, it works very similar. But at this point, you're just not going to create a new account. So the only thing you're doing here is I'm just going to try to log in. You have your email and you have your password. These are the two parameters or fields that you would normally pass in to a website, an API, that will allow you to then log in successfully. Obviously, when you log in, they check your password. There's those sort of things that happen as well, and then we can say stuff like incorrect password or user doesn't exist. That sort of thing also happens here. So once we are attempting to log in, we hit the server then handles that logic. Are you do you have an account? Is the password correct? That sort of thing. If we can pass that check, we then go to the database. Well, we're actually checking this together. So we run the logic, we're going to the database and checking does this user exist, and then we're coming back. If that sort of passes successfully, we then get the user information, and then we can do stuff like verifying the password as well. So if the user does exist in the database, then we check, okay, cool. the password that is linked to this user that was hashed earlier, can we maybe just verify that the password that we're passing now actually belongs to the user that's actually that we have in our database. And then we would normally generate like a JWT, which is just like a token that has like sort of like characteristics about it that allows you to be authenticated, and it can also have additional information about you, like your email address, maybe your access, that sort of thing, your access level, what you may or may not have access to. So JWT is basically like secure information that is sort of packaged and stored in a particular format for you to then be able to perform stuff and actions. Once that happens, we then return a token to the client, and then now that would be like your key to basically be able to go to your profile page on Facebook, for example, reset your password, add friends, remove friends, that sort of thing. You would only be allowed to perform those sort of actions when you are like an authorized or authenticated user, that sort of thing. Um, that's what happens there. And then in terms of how you use JWT, we won't go too much into the specifics of it, but on a very high level, you have to pass in like a header. Header sort of contains like a few fields that you can give it, and you normally make a request and a header. And then in the back end, we also sort of verify the JWT as well, and then we sort of protect the data. So that happens between the server and the client. There's no real database interaction at this point, I believe. From what I've seen so far, you normally just ping the server handles the logic, checks, okay, cool, can we validate or verify this the token, and then we give it back to the user, that sort of thing. The next part, I guess, was just from a like a code level. What we'll be looking at is we're going to be looking at setting up JWT in our HONO application. So different dependencies that we could install. JWT obviously is one, but we're using HONO. HONO has a built-in JWT middleware, so we're going to be using that. And then yeah, we're going to be looking at creating our authentication middleware. So that sort of logic we saw now in the diagram that sort of highlights what happens when a user signs up, like logs in, that sort of high level diagram we looked at. We'll be looking at generating that on the code level, and this won't be part of the scope of this lesson, but we will be looking at further down the line how to protect your API routes. So basically making sure that they are particular sort of like addresses or actions that are only protected and are only like authorized by certain users to access and use. That sort of thing we'll be looking at. um, an example of that would be like an admin user should have access to like admin pages, and normal users would have access to like normal pages, that sort of thing. And then we'll also be looking at implementing role-based action control. So depending on the user's role, we can assign and allocate different roles and responsibilities, that sort of thing. So yeah, this will be a very hands-on, like a sort of like task slash feature we'll be looking at. And again, the goal of this is to sort of make our API a bit more robust, because obviously before we just created an API that allows you to sort of like upload tasks as a user, that sort of thing. So today we just want to make it a little bit more secure, so that when you input your password, we actually hash your password and we secure it. We store it in our database as normal, but then now we also log in to the system as well, so that we can give a bit more meat and a bit more life to our actual API. So the steps would normally be, we'll create like an endpoint, that sort of thing, and I'll run you guys through the code. But on a high level, we just create some sort of logic for us to then interact with our database and our server, and then the diagram that I looked at now with all of those steps, we're basically going to be doing that on a code level now. And yeah, so that's basically it. By the end of the lesson, our key takeaways would be understanding how JWT is used to provide a secure way to authenticate and handle user requests. We can be looking at protected routes, but that won't be in the scope of the lesson. But another thing would just be understanding the flow of like user sign up, registration, having confidence in terms of understanding what happens, and maybe this can be a good like example to think of other places where when you sign in and sign up, they either allow you to log in and that sort of thing, just to sort of get a better understanding. And yeah, what's next is we're probably going to be looking at roles and making our app again more robust, more secure, scaling it, that sort of thing. Yeah, so I'm excited, and we're probably going to dive into the code now. So let's go. Hey guys, so welcome to the coding section of our app. I just thought I'd just run you guys through a few aspects of the code that I sort of changed. You will see that I added a user service. So in the previous lesson, we were testing our tasks API. So we just basically wrote a service that allows us to create a task, update a task, remove a task, that sort of thing. And I just figured let me refactor the code a little bit so that like it's a bit more cleaner and modular. So you will see there's also like a user service which works exactly the same. What happens is it's kind of like a class, which is like an object, and then that class has functions in it. We have like get all users, which basically fetches the users from our database. We have get users by ID, get user by email, that sort of thing. So basically, I just abstracted all of the user logic into a class, which I can then call wherever I need it. I just made it a bit more clean. So you're gonna see that, but the code has been pushed up for you guys to have a look and play around with. So you will see the endpoint is a bit cleaner essentially. So yeah, we're going to be looking at the JWT aspect of our code. So this is our API, this is how it works, that sort of thing. What we want to basically do now is add a few packages. So the first thing we're going to do is let's go to package.json. So once we're in our package.json file, you guys will notice that we need to basically install a library called Organ. And so Organ 2 actually is a library that will allow us to like sort of hash our passwords and compare our passwords, that sort of thing. It works all with JWT. Um, so the first thing we're going to do is let's actually install it. So we can run npm install Organ 2. I've got Organ 2 installed on my machine already. So let me just do that. That's basically going to be that there. Once you add Organ to your machine, we can go back to our code. Cool. Now that we've actually set up like Organ onto our machine, and there's a few sort of packages and stuff we can add. There's some really cool thing called HONO JWT. So I'll do this and I'll show you guys it. What HONO JWT allows us to do is it allows us to use verify and sign, which normally would come with JSON Web Token package, but because we're using HONO, we just have to import it and we don't have to install anything new, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to do that. I'm also going to import Organ also so that I can also just run my password checks, that sort of thing. So as you can see, my endpoints here, this is the same. So that's getting all users. It fetches all users from a database. We have get individual user from a database, that sort of thing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create an endpoint for us to basically be able to sign in and register. So exactly the same diagram that I walked you guys through that included the password and the email and that whole flow. We're going to basically be doing that, but like on a code level, which is quite exciting. So the first thing is I've got an endpoint here. What I can do is, let me see, create a users post endpoint using organ to hash password. Let's see what this does for us. Okay. Cool. I'm using Copilot. So basically, this is a post request we're sending. So we can just do this, and then it takes in a username and a password. It calls the user dot get user by email. So that's one of the methods that we wrote. It basically checks if the user doesn't exist. You're going to throw an error saying user not found. If the user exists, we proceed. We skip the error, and then we're basically going to validate the password. Um, Verify the password. No. So at this point, we actually, this is wrong, I think, because this point we are registering a new user. So we don't need to validate. We just need to hash the password. So this logic is a little bit wrong, but it's fine. I've got the completed code here. So what I'll do is I'll copy this. Yeah, yes, AI doesn't always get it right, but it can get it right most of the time. So what I'll do is you can see there's a post request here already. So I'm going to remove this and then I'm going to just leave this here. So What this then does exactly the same as before. So it pulls in username, email, password from our request body, and then we check if any of those fields are empty, and then we're basically going to say if they are empty, we're going to let you know that these fields are required, so you can't basically submit an empty form, you know. And then once that happens, if everything is filled in correctly, so we have a username, password, and an email, we know we have the correct ingredients to basically create or register a new account. What we then need to do now is remember that diagram. We spoke about hashing the password, right? So that we can sort of encrypt it and make it secure. So what we're doing at this point is we're basically going to call Argon and we're going to hash the password. So at this point, the password that you're giving it, so if you give it ABC, it's going to come out as something completely different. And that's the hash password. And then what we're going to do is we're basically going to say, okay, cool. Now can we create a new user using the email and the hash password? And then that's basically what we're going to do. So I'll test this endpoint with you guys now just to confirm that it actually works. What we should see when we create a new user is we should see a username, email, and a hash password. I think, yeah, we'll see something interesting, and we're gonna see it like a successful message. So let's give it a shot. Let's go to Thunder Client, and then let's go to create users. So what I'll do is I'll basically say, let me just do this to make sure that that doesn't work. It gives us an error because that route doesn't work, so that's working fine. Put back users. Let me call the username, and then I can give it an email of email@gmail.com. So again, our platform is not like bulletproof, because there is like a few sort of like things we can do to improve it. Like again, making sure that we don't have duplicate emails, that sort of thing. So right now you can basically spam the platform, but it's okay because we are learning and we can improve it. We're gonna add all those changes as we go. So, and then I can leave password as password. Let me put password 2. So basically what I'm about to do now is I'm about to create a user called username with the email of email@gmail.com. I know, very creative names. And then password is password 2. So let's send the post request, and then bam. So we got a 200. 200 normally means a success. So the request that you actually made has been successfully approved and it's basically good. You got the thumbs up, right? So you're going to get a message saying user has been created successfully, and then we have an object that basically gets returned from the response that we made. So remember, the diagram had a client, it had a server in the middle, and it had a database. And basically what's happening now is we went from the client to the server, we went to the database, and this is basically the response that we're getting back. So the response now is saying that we have a user with a username that we gave it, an email of email@gmail.com, and a password of not one, password 2, but actually this is the password. It's this weird looking encrypted set of characters, right? So again, that is beautiful because we don't know what the user's password is. We're never going to know it. From this point, we take that string and we basically hash it, or we encrypt it. Basically we take it and we make it a bit like difficult to see or to understand and to read and to decrypt. And so that is basically what we're saving in our database. So that's normally like again, a security sort of like feature and effect, again, just to make it such that it's like users information is sort of safe, that sort of thing. So yeah, we're basically able to successfully create user and password, which is sort of in line with what we wanted to achieve. And then the next thing is like logging in. So we want to be able to like log into the account using our credentials, right? Our username or our password, that sort of thing. So I need to write logic for login. So I don't have it. Okay, I'm gonna say let's try to basically use Copilot again. Maybe make it to see if it's gonna get it correct this time, but it's fine. Um, I've got the piece of code here, so I'll just copy it over. And then let me do this. Um, it. Cool. So logging in works exactly the same. Um, so to run through the logic, you're basically taking in the user's email and a password, right? Because now you're trying to log in. We are just doing some basic validation. So what that checks is the email like empty and is the password empty? And if they're empty, we're basically going to say you can't fill in the form. You can't fill in an empty form. Like you need to give in the correct details. If that check basically passes, we know that okay, cool, you've filled in the correct details, and then now we're basically going to check do you exist, and maybe we can then check the password and make sure that you know you are inputting the correct password. So this is how the logic of the login flow works. Once the validation passes, we're going to just fetch the user, and if there's no user, then it's probably going to be like invalid credentials. So something is incorrect if we don't find a user that matches the email that we're giving it in, right? This normally happens like when you go to a website for the first time and you try to log in instead of signing up. And then what happens is they will basically take the email address and check against a database and check, okay, cool, does this email actually exist? If the email doesn't, or if the user doesn't exist, rather, we basically say incorrect, or maybe you don't exist. Can you create an account instead? So that sort of thing that you normally see time and time again is something like this on a very basic level, obviously. Um, Cool. So let's assume the user does exist and the email address is correct. What we really need to do now is there is a chance that you may input like incorrect password, right? So not the right details. So we need to basically match and check. Okay, cool. Is the password that you are giving us, is that the password we actually have stored in our database for the user? If it is, we know that it's correct. We can allow you to basically have access to the API or to the platform, that sort of thing. So what we're doing here on line 40 is basically is that check, right? We're checking if the user password is correct, and if it's not correct, that's normally when you have like an incorrect password. Normally they would like sort of direct you to like password reset, that sort of thing. But at this level, we're not going to do that right now. We're just basically checking, okay, can we successfully log in, right? Do we have an account? Can we log in? Is our password correct? um, what happens then is, remember in the diagram we basically have a token that gets generated normally after we've successfully checked that the user exists, and we do have like permission to basically proceed, if that makes sense. So once that checks all pass, thumbs up, yay, we normally like get a token, and in that token again we can pass it anything. We can pass it in like your email, pass in your ID, and then we give it like an expiry date. So normally tokens actually expire. Just like again like a safety thing, we basically say like, okay, cool, we're gonna give you access for an hour, again, so that like you can't always be logged in. So maybe if you are maybe let's say in a public space, you walk away from your machine after an hour, and then we're basically going to log you out because your token will expire. Again, that's just like a safety thing that prevents anyone that doesn't have access or shouldn't have access from coming in and performing actions that they shouldn't perform as you or as somebody else. So again, normally a token is accompanied with like an expiry date just for security, just to make sure that if you are who you say you are, you need to give us your password again, and we're gonna re-authenticate you and give you another sort of like expiry date. Um, that was a lot, but let's go through it and walk through the example together. So basically, what I need to do is I've got some emails here. So I will test like with an incorrect email. So let me put in the email address that I actually use now with the wrong password. So what should happen is it should fail because we have a user that probably does exist, but the password we gave it is incorrect. So what normally happens here is, can you reset your password, that sort of thing. We know our password is password 2. So we just need to do this and then what should happen is we should have a login successfully. So basically that's how user authentication on a high level works. Right now we just did sign in and sign up, and I hope that was helpful, and stay tuned. The next part we'll be looking at taking this a little bit further, expanding it, making it a bit more robust, secure, having some protected routes, and so